Dispatch powered by HSBC.
A very warm welcome to Daily Dispatch powered by HSBC. I'm Priya Sheth, and joining me on this very interesting panel is a host of experts who are going to talk to us a little bit about what their expectations are from the union budget. And let me quickly introduce all of them to you. We have with us Mr. A.K. Srikanth, who's the CEO at KLAY. We have R.K. Mishra, who's the co-founder at Yulu. And we have Vivek Veda, who's the co-founder and CFO at KreditBee. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining us today. I want to begin with you, Mr. Mishra, to understand a little bit about what your wish list is from the union budget. It's just around the corner. Tell us a little bit about what your expectations are.
Priya, I think mobility is an integral part of an economy because, as they say, that economy moves on the wheels. And given that what we have seen in last 2 years, the people mobility and the goods mobility both have become a so integral part of our daily living. We are not able to move given the lockdowns and things like that. But if we don't move, the goods have to come to us. And that's why you see that explosion of gig economy, delivery and things like that. And despite the challenges of lockdowns and all that, I think this sector has kept economy and people's lives going. Unfortunately, most of it is being done in a manner which is not sustainable. And most of the people who are doing these services are the people who are actually low-income people. They cannot afford, most of them, they cannot afford the bikes of their own. 70-80% do not have even the licenses. So they are out of this primary economy. What happens is these are the people who potentially use the services like Yulu, which is a low-speed electric vehicle, non-polluting, and also it takes care of the people who don't have their own bike or they don't have a driving license. And this is as per the Government of India notification. Unfortunately, the FAME scheme, and by the way, 90% of the electric two-wheelers sold in the country are in this category. Now, for whatever reason, best known to the government, this category has been excluded from the FAME 2 subsidy. And this was primarily, I think, by the big manufacturers whose opinion was taken. They're only trying to make super bikes, electric super bikes. And I don't know what super bikes usage are in this country. And that's why nobody has been able to sell those. 10% of the sales are only happening in the high-speed bikes. So low-speed bikes, which are up to 25 kilometers, do not require license and are the backbone of the delivery, and the 80% sales in the country should be included into the FAME scheme, and all the benefits should be passed on to that. That's one wish list. Second, the mandating, like Delhi government has done, Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs, which oversees all the urban affairs of various cities, should also mandate that progressively over, for example, 5 years, all the delivery should happen gradually through electric mobile only, because it is very easily manageable. Individually mandating is very difficult. You and I may not buy a motorcycle, which is electric or car, but gig workers and delivery can very easily be mandated because they are the ones who are on the road. Non-office hours, maximum road traffic is on that. So if that can be done, there'll be huge uptake in electric vehicle because there's a PIL now. PLI scheme for the electric vehicles and the battery. This will also give the flip to demand, as well as it will also increase the availability of non-polluting vehicles on the roads.
Right. Thanks for that, Mr. Mishra. I want to come to you, Mr. A.K. Srikanth, to understand a little bit about the education system and in terms of what kind of expectations do you have from the union budget this time around?
We come from the early years education system, which I think has almost continuously been closed since March 2020. So in a sense, I would think that this is one sector that's been hit the hardest. For the simple reason there's been absolutely no physical schools open at all from that time to now. So I think in terms of wish list, if I may, I think we are looking at schools starting to open up as the pandemic turns endemic and as the economy starts limping back to normal. I think the first thing is, because we've been an industry that's been so heavily hit, we would need government intervention on two accounts. One, I think the education spend itself was driven down by 5% last year because the funds had to go to emergency usage connected with the pandemic. But this year we'd have to make up for that. I'm hoping that there's at least a 10% increase in the allocation to education this year in order to be able to support us to get back to our feet. Given that the children would be coming back after the pandemic, health and safety becomes a huge imperative in our business. I think we need support from the government in order to be able to pull that off and make it a safe place for our children to come back to. I think these two would be the most important parts of the wish list. Of course, if we don't see the government increasing the spend, we're talking about a gross enrollment, ratio of reaching 50% over the next few years. That would become very difficult to attain if we are not able to increase the allocations this year. And of course, one last thing which I never pass these opportunities to talk about is the GST. Given that we are on the top slab for GST, I think in education, you'll have to give us concessions on that, probably bring it down to a 5% slab, especially in times like this, which have been very hard for our sector.
Right. Thanks so much for that, Mr. Srikanth. I want to come to you, Mr. Vivek, to talk a little bit about the fintech space, considering that there is a lot happening in the fintech space as we speak. Tell us a little bit about what your wish list is from the government.
So definitely this budget is very crucial considering that economy effort to fully recover and set for the growth path. Now, if you look at of late, there have been a lot of efforts from the regulators and government in the fintech space, where they have recognized the role of fintechs in reaching the underserved or unserved population, where still banks or large NBFCs don't have the presence. However, the biggest challenge which is faced by the fintechs and where we require some allocations or some intervention from the regulators is ease of availability of funds. See, equity is one side where definitely, there is a good inflow coming from across all geographies into the Indian story. However, the lending business or per se fintech is something where raising funds from banks or domestic fundraising is very critical. Now, if you look at, be it during pandemics, whatever schemes which have been announced by the government, more or less the benefits were given to the large NBFCs. Small or nascent stage NBFCs still were deprived where the availability of funds from the banks or PSU banks for that reason were not available. So somewhere we require the fintech sector to be considered somewhere in the priority sector kind of a list where there is a earmarked funds or there is a earmarked things given to the banks to participates in the fintech growth journey. So that is the wish list one, ease of availability of domestic funds. Second thing, what we or as a from the startup world, what we are looking at is startups are dependent a lot on ESOPs for attracting the talent. Now, if you look at the taxation of ESOPs, it's very weird where the ESOPs are taxed as and when they are exercised rather than matching it with the actual cash flow. Plus, at some level, it can go up to a 40%, 42% kind of a tax bracket. So somewhere we want a clarity on the ESOP taxation, which will be very big boost to the startup world. A lot of young generation employees are willing to take the bet in terms of very low fixed salaries, but with a good upside on the ESOPs. But the moment the taxation and all those things comes in, it becomes very tricky to attract the right talent. So somewhere we require some intervention from the government on the taxation part.
Right. Thanks so much for that. Very well said, all three of you. But I want to talk a little bit about how business will change post in this calendar year, considering that we've seen that the last 1.5 years, 2 years has been difficult for industry overall. With the budget coming in this time around and with possible changes that we have expected or are on the wish list of so many of all of you across industry, I want to come to you, Mr. Mishra, to understand a little bit about how business will change. What kind of plans do you have for Yulu in 2022, considering that there could perhaps be some relaxation or some improvement or introduction by the government this time around in the budget?
So I think what I'm hearing, and again, several panels have been discussing about this. I think the government is very, mindful of the fact there are certain sectors and the economies which are contact economies, whether it is tourism, whether it is hotel industry, whether it is restaurant industry, and where it is the delivery business and things like that have been very heavily impacted. Certain sectors can do work from home, but this industry actually supports people who are working from home. I think there'll be something in the budget. My worry is that if it is becomes like giving 1,000 rupees or 2,000 rupees one time ex gratia, and but that's not going to work. You, rather than giving a fish, you have to make it easier for people to fish. Give the benefits and concessions which are going to improve the overall sector. For example, I mentioned in the beginning, mandated that delivery, because this also, you need to give a flip to the economy. If you want electric vehicles to be manufactured, you have to create the demand for it. Now, how can you create the demand is by mandating, and there are certainly few things government can mandate. The government can mandate, for example, public sector buses, correct? School buses are, for example, around 50% of the all buses in any city. Why can't we say the school buses every year 20% school buses will go electric? And suddenly you see the electric vehicle bus market. Right now only, the government mandated bus purchase is happening by like BMTC in Bangalore or the city corporations, which is government money, which cannot fuel the demand. It has to be the private sector. The government has the ability to regulate and mandate, which is already regulated sector. Autos, for example. Autos are licensed. Why government cannot say that, okay, every, 20% of autos, all autos, new licenses will be given only to electric. Now, as far as Yulu is concerned, we have huge demand. We are not able to cater to the demand because supply chain bottlenecks are so huge. And unfortunately, very little in this country is being made. Everything has to be imported. If it is not the full assembly, you have to import the components, which is almost impossible to get. So we have a plan of putting 100,000 bikes on the roads by end of December. By end of June itself, we are getting around 40,000 bikes on the road. And these bikes are potentially going to higher ratio will go to the goods delivery because that is where maximum demand is. And I think that's where maximum impact will be there. You and I maybe will use one trip in the morning to go to the railway station or metro station, and then from home, and then one to the office and one in the evening. But the gig economy worker making 8 to 10, 20 trips. So the impact you can make, both in terms of his economic value addition, because petrol at 89 rupees, I mean, the crude at $89 is absolutely not going to be possible for a person to manage this, also make money out of it, and be economically viable. So from Yulu's point of view, we have tied up our funding. We have placed our order. So we are going to deploy 100,000 Yulu vehicles, hoping government also brings enabling provisions. And Delhi government has done it. Delhi government has said that delivery has to be moving towards electric vehicles, so which increases the demand, and that will give domestic production. And that is how the PLI scheme, which they have done, will also be beneficial to the economy.
Right. Thanks for that, Mr. Mishra. We look forward to more vehicles, specifically EVs, on the road. Coming to you, Mr. Srikanth, what kind of plans do you have for KLAY in 2022, and perhaps any enabling provisions by the government that could fuel these plans going forward?
So 2022, by what we are seeing and expecting, I think we'll see a large part of the year with physical schools actually open, 22-23. The next academic session. But what is likely to persist, as I've said before, is a hybrid model. So you'd probably have some level of online intervention going side by side the physical schools, because as the pandemic goes on, what we're seeing is there's more likely to be micro containment zones rather than a blanket lockdown of cities. So you might still have a need for certain sects of children who would need to continue education online because their residence comes under a micro-containment zone or the school comes under a micro-containment zone. Now, while I'm seeing this hybrid model develop, I think one big necessity in all of this is the IT infrastructure itself. Because while it is, I would say, above average in the major cities, getting it across to the B and C tier towns because of infrastructure becomes an issue. High-speed internet, which we need to be able to conduct, classroom simulated exercises, actually need a higher outlay of expense from the part of the schools and the part of the children to be having it. So some degree of facilitating high-speed internet in a subsidized manner to the industry that we are in, perhaps would help the need of the hour of conducting hybrid models. Otherwise, children just lose out on education altogether.
Right. Thanks for that. And anything the KLAY is doing in terms of expansion, in terms of plans for 2022?
Yes, we are looking very actively at expanding our network. Our network of schools currently is close to about 140 schools across the country. We are trying to reach the 180 to 200 mark by the end of next year. So we're actively looking for expansion, but most of this expansion we're talking about is happening still in the major 8 cities in India. We're not really going to the next year, at least in this year, maybe in the coming years.
All right. Look forward to that. Mr. Vivek, tell us a little bit about what the KreditBee's plans are for 2022 and how the government's regulations could be an enabling factor out there.
Priya, if you look at the KreditBee journey, we go exponentially during this pandemic where we are into unsecured lending. So we became very cautious in terms of, whom we should give loans and how the collection mechanism will work. Overall, we believe that with this, the pandemic more or less coming to an end, and that's a belief, we are looking for an exponential growth again. The good part is the customer segment, what we are catering, is still not touched by large banks or NBFCs. They more or less rely on local lenders where the terms of the lending are really harsh. So somewhere we are trying to reach that kind of a customer set. Just to give you an idea, over last 2 years in this journey, we have upgraded around 11 lakh customers who came to us as new to credit or first time borrowers. And now they have a decent bureau score where they can approach the banks or large NBFCs for their larger fund needs. So somewhere we will continue this journey by catering this new to credit or first time borrowers where our focus is just to build their bureau score over a period of time, give them the money when it is required, be it a small amount, and then scale up over a period of time. Now, as mentioned earlier, one of the crucial things where we will be looking for from the government is ease of getting funds, which will be very important. Second thing, what we have noticed is if you look at, there are a lot of regulations which one has to follow. And being into lending, there is some extra regulations which we have to follow from the regulator side. So somewhere what we are looking for is that a very holistic picture where the startup should be given some window where the reasonable compliance which is required should be followed, but they should not be treated in par with the matured industry in terms of the compliance followings or in terms of the filing. So we want some ease out there so that the business can be grown substantially. And once you attain a reasonable size or scale, then things can be built in or things can be taken as the matured companies are dealt with it in this environment. So that's where we are looking for some easing out.
All right. On that note, thank you, gentlemen, for joining us today. It's been a pleasure speaking to all of you. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Priya.
Thank you.